Welcome to this early Sunday morning at Unframe Festival. We have Toufic Haddad speaking. I've just sprung in as the moderator, so Toufic can tell you himself what he's going to be talking about. You've got up to 30 minutes, and then there'll be time for discussion and questions from the floor. So, given us because of the delay, I'd say let's just get started.
All right, fair enough, comrades. Welcome. Hello, good morning. Hope everyone is well. Um, the title of my talk on the schedule today, before I start, is basically says stopping the EU and US-led war machine in the Middle East region, right? However, and that's indeed what I wish to talk about. But before I start, I think it's important for me to say that the initial title that I proposed had the word Zionism in there. That we're stopping the U.S.
Recording in progress.
So I was saying, okay, it's being recorded now. I got just confirmation that it's being recorded. That all the better. uh, this to say that so the initial program said that I'm going to speak to stopping the EU and US-led war machine in the Middle East region, and the word Zionism and the stopping the US EU Zionist war machine in the Middle East region was the original topic of this discussion, and it will be the topic of this discussion. And if anyone has a problem with that, they can stop the broadcast right now. But I am going to speak to that very clearly because they are not the same thing, but they are distinct politically, and it is an act of intellectual dishonesty to not include that in this, as well as political dishonesty. And we have to defend our right to free speech and to free critique as political actors, as academics, as people of conscience, and as progressives. So I think I need to start from that starting point. And whoever doesn't like it in the German state or elsewhere, well, doesn't matter. What can I say? We're sticking with what we're going to talk about because there's a damn genocide going on in Palestine, and we need to organize against it. So basically, my talk today it wants to basically start off by getting folks in this audience to recognize the important moment in history that we're at, both in Palestine, a year after the sort of genocide has begun in the Gaza Strip, and we know all the horrors of, what that has meant. I hope so, at the very least. But in addition to that, you have something else that's going on, which is the sort of collapse of Western liberalism as part of a long decline, and particularly most recently, the re-election of Donald Trump, the man who was inciting against the very system 4 years ago, has today come back to power in a definitive victory over the Democratic Party. What to say? We are less than a month, well, about a month and a bit away from Trump taking power, which will no doubt be a seismic change in world politics and US politics and will mean a lot for the Palestinian issue. So we need to have a good sense of analysis and need a sense of maturity and to get the situation, our approach right, to be prepared for what is coming down the pipeline. So there, in this regard, I would argue that there is no substitute towards having and committing ourselves to a clear methodology of analyzing the situation, reflecting upon it, making collective decisions around it, and just doing that again and again, and not despairing, and not at the same time falling into forms of demoralization or conspiracy or defeatism or whatnot. It is not the time for that. We have to be prepared for some major battles coming up, and which we're already enmeshed in. With that as an introduction, my talk will be divided into three basic parts. One, where we stand in Palestine today. Two, where we stand in regard to the West in relation to what is happening in Palestine today. And three, how we might be able to build a movement to actually stop the genocide and the horrors that we witness every day. So, part one of this talk goes back to the situation of what is happening in Palestine today. Uh, Here, I'm not here to go into the details and of how horrific the situation is. That's an assumption that is, it's not even an assumption, it's objective fact of how horrific it is. But what the important point here is to point to the fact that this is a historical juncture, not just because it's an act of genocidal proportions, but because of the political significance of the moment. So, what folks need to realize is from 1967 to 1987, uh, Israel's policies vis-a-vis the occupied Palestinian territories, the West Bank, Gaza Strip, and East Jerusalem, was one of direct occupation. Okay, Israel was in the cities, it was in the towns, it supposed to be administering to the basic needs of the Palestinian population. They would do nothing of the sort. They didn't change one light bulb in the whole damn occupied territories or pave one road or add one hospital bed to the whole place. This eventually resulted in 1987 in the First Intifada, which made the possibility of direct Israeli occupation in the Palestinian cities impossible, okay, and impossible. So they needed to have a restructure the nature of the occupation. This came about eventually in 1993 through the Oslo process, where basically the model of indirect occupation was applied on the OPT. The basic logic was in the main Palestinian cities, you would create a Palestinian Authority out of the bureaucracy of the PLO that would be brought back from diaspora in Tunis, and they would administer to the scenario of the Palestinians in across the OPT, supposedly taking care of their civilian needs. And this was supposed to begin a process that could open up discussion around the question of the final status issues, statehood, occupation, etc. In reality, it resulted in nothing of the sort. It resulted actually in a scenario that 30 years later is nothing less than what every international organization has deemed a situation of extended military occupation and apartheid enforced through heavy military force. In truth, the attempt at indirect occupation was basically an attempt to separate from the Palestinians, but to continue to control them. Israeli economist Ari Arnon, he's an economist actually, described it as neither two nor one. If Palestinians were integrated into the Israeli state, they would have destroyed the Jewish, quote unquote, Jewish character of the state. If they did not give them citizenship, it would erode the democratic character of the state. So basically, this was the main solution to that structural dilemma that Israel had as a self-defined Jewish democratic state. So separation and control was the answer, creation of the Palestinian Authority as a governance body that was kind of sandwiched in between the occupation on one side and the people on the other. But in truth, it was Israel and the international donor community which held the commanding heights over this scenario. So they were, at any time, Israel could go in and out and destroy and kill and arrest whoever they wanted to. At any moment, the internationals could stop aid or conduct some sort of act or not act, basically, when Israel did what it was doing to actually destroy the possibility of a Palestinian state or whatnot. And this basic scenario resulted in the scenario we have today, an apartheid scenario composed of 156 different, the West Bank in particular being transformed into archipelago of different islands, 156 different islands, more than 700 different checkpoints and obstacles blocking and preventing Palestinian contiguity between one another and turning the West Bank officially into a Swiss cheese state. And of course, there was no efforts to, no, well, in any case, this is the entrenching of the apartheid across the occupied territories sort of happened gradually over this 30 years, but certainly accelerated during the Second Intifada, where they killed many of after the Camp David Accords, where there was the meeting in July 2000 where the Palestinian leadership and the Israeli leadership and the Americans sort of supposedly had their effort at negotiations. The Palestinians were offered nothing compared to their national rights, no end to occupation, no end to the settlement clusters there, no return of Jerusalem, no return of refugees. And when Palestinians said no to it, they basically came after them. They killed the top leaders, they imprisoned top leaders. And then when Palestinians attempted to democratically organize to actually get rid and tack another political path in 2006, Hamas won the elections, even though the international community had sort of sponsored it. And then the international community didn't recognize those elections, and they encouraged to have a civil war uh, amongst the Palestinians by arming the defeated Fatah faction. And this resulted in the divided geopolitical scenario that we have today between the West Bank and Gaza under different Palestinian political regimes. It was a very transparent way that basically the international community was enforcing a kind of divide and rule over the Palestinians and enforcing that through various forms of sticks and carrots. The stick was given to Gaza. The carrot was given to the West Bank in an effort to corrupt the Palestinian leadership even more. Gaza, of course, we said the major stick. And we can understand why Gaza was the major stick. It was the largest of the 156 islands that was created under the apartheid scenario. It was the site of the largest set of contradictions. It had 2.3 million Palestinians in it, and 80% of them are refugees. And to even talk about their political rights or would bring up immediately the question of Israel's creation and the ethnic cleansing that took place there in 1948. So basically, the Western powers attempted to prevent Palestinians from even tacking a different path once apartheid was entrenched. They denied Palestinian national rights at Oslo. They denied them through democratic elections. They even denied Palestinian rights when they tried to even resist being under siege. In 2017, 18, 19, there were major popular protests that marched in Gaza to try and end the siege of the Gaza Strip, a territory that the United Nations had declared in 2012 was already unlivable, was basically a toxic dump. And by the way, there's no reason why Gaza could not have access to the world. Gaza is a place that has a sea. It's connected to historical trade routes. It's a major Palestinian city. But all of this, of course, was shut down. And it obviously served another political purpose for Palestinians as the center of Palestinian nationalism, which is also, particularly after the Nakba, and with the strong refugee character to it. And this also helps explain why, basically, in the context of the failure of direct occupation and the failure of indirect occupation and the apartheid scenario, uh, a military solution was ultimately sought to at least change the equation in Gaza by Hamas, as we saw on October 7th. By the way, it's also probably worth noting that Hamas, when they conducted October 7th, noted that their actions were taken in a preemptive manner. This was announced on the day of the thing. Nobody really knew how to deal with that piece of information. Um, and it wasn't really reported in Western presses about it. But the truth is, actually, just yesterday, the Israeli press actually acknowledged that the Israeli Shabak and intelligence agencies had floated a proposal to the leadership to actually conduct a mass assassination of Hamas's leaders on October 1st. So it seems like Hamas did have something, have inside intelligence and something to their claim that they needed to do something preemptively. Now, obviously, October 7th was something much larger that took much longer to prepare. But the context for that preparation and for taking that decision clearly came out of the larger historical political trajectory that I just described of direct occupation, indirect occupation, and the fact that the Gaza Strip had been turned into this sort of, open air prison, that it wasn't, you didn't need to be a radical socialist to acknowledge that. You had the former British Prime Minister basically saying it. So anyone who's attempting not to acknowledge it is sticking their head in the sand and trying to lie to you. So in any case, in the context of the failed this political crisis, I mean, between quotations, because it's hardly a political crisis, but it is a political crisis insofar as the West and Israel's main plan for controlling the OPT, integrating those territories into Israel, denying Palestinian rights, was just exploded on October 7th. The apartheid scenario was completely, definitively destroyed. Israel used to basically believe that a remote occupation could be enforced, and it could be enforced indefinitely, um, through the scenario that existed on October 6th, through the high technology sort of three-dimensional occupation that was considered the most advanced technological form of surveillance and control the world has ever witnessed, and on any territory. With the collapse, and by the way, the forces in Gaza were able to completely smash the high-tech regime. There were 400 Israeli soldiers on guard, supposedly guard between quotations, enforcing the occupation across the Gaza Strip on October 7th. 300 of them were basically killed on the day or taken back into Gaza. And that was the main focus of the attack on October 7th. That's not to say that that's entirely what happened. In fact, the success of October 7th military strategy led to scenarios that seemingly Hamas even didn't predict, but we don't have time to go into that now. The real point is that Israel, in the context of the failure of the apartheid scenario, basically went to its old handbook and said genocide is the answer. We are back to 48. They were very clear about this, that we need a Gaza Nekba. And in fact, not just that it's going to end in Gaza, but not just to transform Gaza into a place that has not capable of sustaining life, so that if the war ever ends or genocide ever ends, Palestinians will also be basically shipped off on ships to Canada or Albania or Germany or Uganda. And basically, that also isn't the beginning of it. Clearly, Israel and its government has expansionist ambitions and ideologies to it in the West Bank. And this is not even expansionist. They are looking very clearly and openly towards the coming annexation of Area C in the West Bank. They are also qualitatively attempting to destroy the concept of Palestinian nationalism by actually killing the United Nations Relief and Works Agency, which is effectively the main government in the Gaza Strip, not Hamas, by the way. 80% of the people in Gaza are refugees, so they're actually represented by UNRWA. And that is what is behind the effort to actually eliminate UNRWA. It is an attempt at qualitative liquidation, in addition to genocide on the ground, ethnic cleansing in parts of Gaza, and perhaps we have to be very honest about it, that Israel still has been successful in transforming the entirety of the Gaza population into a mobile population and there's no reason why we shouldn't assume that Israel could still potentially attempt mass transfers into Egypt or into Jordan or elsewhere. With all that said, however, the scenario that has arisen for Israel is not very rosy. The scenario has opened up. Obviously, it's not, the situation for Palestinians goes without saying. I've said it, but from even Israel's, attempts to basically an open-ended conflict has emerged there. Is the Israeli army seems to be sinking in the sands of Gaza as well as Lebanon. We have a scenario in both geographical contexts where the conflict dynamics, so to speak, are not contingent upon particular leaders, many of whom have been killed, but on dynamics, resistance dynamics that have already been set in place that are akin to a war of attrition, a death by 1,000 scratches, uh, and the only way Israel has been able to continue to this stage so far is through massive transfers of military and weapons and protection from its Western allies. We have to be very honest about that. Um, we are also at a scenario where even powers like Saudi Arabia have basically said, and who were dreaming of normalizing with the Israelis, have already said, look, we can't even touch Israel. We actually side with Iran on the question of they need to stop the genocide. And that this is basically obvious because the ghost of Gaza is around the Middle East and is threatening to haunt every single Arab regime and leader. In fact, just last night, there was even an attack in Jordan on the Israeli embassy. And this ghost is going around the region and may go beyond it. And one should not be surprised if that's the case. Um, so that finishes what I need to say about the situation in Palestine and how it looks for Israel, I would say, and broader speaking. So now let's turn to the question of the West. In this scenario, indirect occupation was actually a Western plan. It was the Americans pushed the Israeli leadership to go into Oslo. They got rid of the Shamir regime in 1992, and they tapped basically the Rabin regime, which was interested in the time and was looking for practical solutions to the dilemma of the First Intifada. And that part of the Israeli Labor Party believed in indirect occupation, which was a plan that actually went back to 1967 and Israeli military general Yigal Allon. Um, but Oslo failed and blew up, as we said, and it blew up the Western plan when it did that too. Israel filled the void, as I said, by just going back to its genocidal handbook. That's pretty obvious. And in so doing, it was aided by, particularly in the early period, by the exaggerations and lies and innuendo and racism that was uh, topped onto the Israeli narrative about what was taking place, what took place on October 7th, and the broader general ignorance or the unclarity around the situation that had developed in Gaza, that it was so bad, but the truth being that it was that was covered basically the truth of the situation. Well, it wasn't covered. Every UN agency announced it every day about how bad the situation was in Gaza, but for some reason, everybody believed that this situation of conflict management was sustainable indefinitely. October 7th blew up those presumptions. Israel filled the void, and basically the Western governments tagged along in the shadow of the Israelis, protecting the Israeli narrative and arming it. And behind this, of course, was the deep interest that the West needed to reveal about what supporting its key ally in the Middle East region. We are talking at a place that has significant Eastern Mediterranean gas reserves, that Israel is very much has been incorporated into the political and geopolitical strategies of Western Europe, of Europe and America, basically, particularly after Ukraine, where that set of hydrocarbons is seen to be an important part of making sure the fuel, you guys hanging out in Germany have a nice warm building that is partially warmed by Eastern Mediterranean gas. At the same time, we have larger geopolitical things going on, like the new Cold War, the rise of China, the rise of multipolarity, the fact that the Western regime was basically, had October 7th not happened, the key political maneuver that the Biden and Western administration was working towards, as was announced in the United Nations less than a month before October 7th, was, of course, the India, UAE, Saudi, Jordan, Israel trade corridor and energy corridor. Uh, and that was supposed to be the counter of the West to Chinese quote unquote expansionism westward. So basically, that was also blown up with what happened in October 7th and thereafter. Um, in addition to this, in the political context, you have also the problem of the fact that the Western Bloc was their fears around um, Arab democracy were substantiated with the Arab revolutionary spirits that emerged in 2011. Basically, even though this mass revolutionary wave had forms of successes, many of them have been aborted or been run into great difficulties, but the fundamental conditions still remain, which generated these revolutionary movements, and they have not been solved yet. But basically, it meant that the West could not, the old system of relying upon dictators was not so stable, which meant that they were more dependent upon Israel as their key organic ally in the region, which they helped to establish itself from the very early days and until today. And that was more substantiated after the Arab Revolutionary waves of 2011, as well as the failures of the West in Iraq and Afghanistan, which showed that Western troops on the ground could not go back to an old school colonialism, nor could they rely upon the old dictators. In addition to that, you have a larger crisis of capitalism that has been taking place since 2007. Basically, the world economy was about to go off a cliff, and neoliberalism basically was about to destroy the entire world economy. They did not solve that problem in any fundamental way because basically it was an ideological failure. They quote unquote solved it through printing more money and at the end of the day, giving that out and how they distributed that money was very important for being able to basically, it's a political question. Who gets that money? Who gets screwed in a financial crisis or not is a political question, not something that's determined by markets. The market already failed. So basically, you had major market failure that was offset by printing money that was given to their friends that screwed the poor people. And Germany played a big part in that, actually, as you well know. But soon after, of course, you had also COVID in the last few years. And all I'm trying to say is basically the system of market allocation failed, and there was no alternative system that came through to throw neoliberalism off of its deathbed. So we are in a zombie capitalism today. That's not my. That's analysts of some economists as well as others who talk about a new form of techno-feudalism that has emerged, where actually profit comes out of these kind of favorable arrangements that we saw how they gave the money out after the financial collapse, and in addition to the fact that hydrocarbons like oil and gas, new sources of that, like in the Eastern Mediterranean, as well as war, became good sources or potential sources for where capital could find profit and speculate on profit. And here, Israel's role was key, in addition to the fact that Israel has also offered an important element of research and development and part of the high tech war, which is also another source of potential growth or at least profit for the global capitalist elite classes, at least from the West in their war on that. So that is explains Western backing for the situation in Palestine. Let's move to what we can do about it in the last few minutes of my talk. We are in a very dangerous situation because Israel's maneuver and also that of the West basically relies upon a radical right-wing revolution taking place in world politics. It is a revolution that entails uh, eliminating the rules-based order of world politics post World War II. We see that in the basic principle of World War II was that we got so successful at killing each other that we need to have a kind of system around that. But I haven't really heard the state of Germany saying they're going to arrest Netanyahu from the ICC charges against him. And that's what I mean about changing the rules-based order of things. But it goes well beyond that. We're talking about normalizing a far-right agenda that normalizes right-wing fascistic principles, undermine democracy, that are anti-immigrant, that are Islamophobic, that criminalize basic principles of civil liberties, assembly, right to protest, free speech, etc. These are all under threat in the New World Order, and the Palestine movement is very much front and center of this. And for that reason, we have an obligation to defend basic progressive values as well as the institutions of progressive values, not to throw away the baby with the bathwater, because a lot of things we won were the successes of working class movements, and we don't want to get rid of these all institutions either. But clearly there are big deficiencies in the system, and that's pretty self-evident because a genocide is taking place. So, what does this mean? I do not have the entire answer, but I would suggest the following. Of course, the situation is complex. The situation around capitalism and geopolitics is complex, but genocides are also not complex. And they also do not just happen. They need to be financed, they need to be conceived, they need to be defended, they need to be institutionalized, they need to be armed. They need to be given material and immaterial sources. And for that reason, we can identify what these sources are, and we have an obligation in this time in history to identify them, unmask them, and attempt to end them definitively. Today, we know what happened in the Holocaust in terms of and other genocides and the culpability of certain actors. We know IBM, we know Citibank, we know Ford Motors were all investing in Nazi Germany, and today has its equivalent in different companies and corporations and states who are implicated in the genocide in Palestine. For that reason, I can only suggest the following. The architecture of Zionist and Western imperial capitalist facilitation of the genocide across the world looks different in different places. That means there is no holistic, single, unifying thing that everybody can do except under the basic principle of uniting against the facilitation of genocide and apartheid. That needs to be our major motto, which we unite around. In this, I suggest we push as much, we have the obligation to push forward as much as possible through parliamentary, but also extra parliamentary or non-parliamentary means. And clearly, in given how drastic the situation is, that there needs to be emphasis on the latter, I would argue, because particularly in places like Germany, which are playing key roles in a genocide, parliamentary means have not proven very successful. That's not a call to arms, but it's a call to mobilization, and that we are being judged by history now. In that regard, I would also add to this then the need for our movement and our side to incorporate elements of research in our activism, that to study that architecture well, who, where, how, when, what is happening, what are the links, and then also to have a realistic assessment of our side. What is our human resource potential as well as our financial, and to try and set realistic goals around how we can mobilize a mass movement and take out, unmask and expose, challenge, and obstruct the sources of facilitation of the genocide. That is our obligation. I think there are many, so there are thousands of sites where that take place in forms of hard and soft power. It is not my role to play that, to do that work for you. That is the work of each environment, each locale, each city, each town, each state. But history is our judge, and Uh, don't just do it for Gaza, I would say. Do it also for yourself. Because the new right-wing revolution that's taking place uh, uh, threatens world peace, threatens Palestinians, Arabs, Jews, threatens basic civility and great deal of the progressive accomplishments of working class people for decades. And we have to realize this historical moment and step up to it. Thank you. I can't hear anything more though.
Yeah, thank you very much, Toufic. Before opening it up to people discussion, just a slight clarification. We want to talk about Zionism and we need to talk about Zionism. We're also in Germany where conferences have been closed down, just for mentioning the word, but we're here now and our unit's been closed down in 2 weeks anyway. So don't feel free to talk about everything that we need to talk about. At the same time, we're being filmed. If you don't want to be part of the film, you can stand at the side, but please come to the front if you want to say anything. Now, anyone wants to ask Toufic any questions or anyone wants to make their own contribution, please put your hand up. Don't all rush at once. Certainly. Do we have another microphone? Oh, okay.
Hi. Thank you so much for your talk. It was very, very interesting, and thank you for having such a broad view of the topic and talking about all of that. And my question is about the right-wing revolution that you mentioned, because a lot of time when I hear people talking about this phenomenon, I hear right-wing wave, or like I hear other words. So I'm wondering why you decided to use the word revolution. And also you mentioned something about this right-wing revolution um, making well, anyway, having a very big impact on the Israeli Zionist project. And so I wonder if you could elaborate on that. Thank you.
Yes,
Yeah,
yes.
sorry, I just swatched my. Okay. No, I think probably best to take a row and then you answer everything at the end. Um, well,
Yes.
we'll
Thank you.
just see if there are other questions. If there are no other questions, you can go straight away. Well, actually, I've got one question, which is that I've been having conversations with people recently where some people are arguing the USA doesn't need Israel anymore because it's got Egypt, it's got other Arab states. I don't find this argument very convincing, and it seems from what you're saying you don't either. But maybe could you say something about the current why the US, well, whether and why the US still needs Israel? Do we have any more? I don't see. So maybe you can go back on those two questions and we'll see.
Great. Do you hear me?
Yeah.
You hear me? Good. Okay, thank you for the first question from the comrade. What I was trying to, when I used the word revolution, I was saying what I was, to be precise about it, the four they they are banking on a right-wing revolution taking place, basically. The changes to allow this genocide to go forward and be legitimized and whitewashed entails a a comprehensive right-wing revolution against all of our values. Okay, genocide goes without saying, it's against all of our values, but then I also named also all the other things that are actually under threat because also people speaking and mobilizing around a genocide, uh, is also being criminalized. And this is part and parcel of a larger set of kind of right-wing values that they're trying to push forward, and not just values, but actual agendas to ignore things like the ICC, to ignore a rules-based order of the world, even a poor one. That's the point. Like, in addition to all the other aspects that I mentioned, freedom of assembly, Islamophobia, anti-immigrant politics, the normalization of a hard right-wing agenda for so many different things. I mean, the Trump regime is really planning some pretty scary, horrific, large things that both against Palestine and in general. And that's what I mean about the revolution, basically. They want to, in fact, yesterday, the actual this what I just said is actually not what I just said, but the headline of Haaretz basically read the same thing, that he's banking on a kind of right wing. You have to understand what it means that basically the ICC ruling is not taken into account by the Western powers, right? What does that mean? It's a major break in the liberal internationalist order if that is the case, basically. All right. So that's what I mean by the revolutionary aspect of it. Now, I don't think they're at that stage yet, but basically, in the context of the crisis of capitalism that we are witnessing and the crisis of politics and social movements that we're also witnessing, and the ascendance of the right, they're not quite at the stage of a revolution. But the point is, we clearly see the signs of on the horizon, the four horsemen of the apocalypse coming from AFD on one side and the collapse of the liberal Democrats here and there, and who knows what. So that's what I'm talking about, and that's what we need to be mobilized around. And I think it's a test for the left to see its mettle, to be honest, if it can organize a counter to it. And here I'm basically arguing that Palestine needs to be the tip of the spear, but not the only spear, but like it's basically where all these issues are being brought together. And so I leave it there. I hope that clears, that I'm clear about at least that term of the word. The other thing, the other question was, does the U.S. need Israel anymore? I mean, I think that goes without saying. They're very clear about them needing it. There's no question about that. I think the only, there's different ways to look at this. Some people have always said, oh, the U.S. never needs Israel. It's actually just a Zionist conspiracy that, the Zionist lobby in Washington, which pushes this. I am not an advocate of that approach at all. At the end of the day, Israel has been sponsored hundreds of billions of dollars just since 1967, 20 billion just this year for the genocide at the very least. And, they might as well have just been handing out $3,000 checks to every single Israeli out there. But in any case, uh, there, for all the reasons I said, basically, whether it's because Arab democracy and social unrest and political unrest is out there, and the West has no reliable partners in this region, and Israel's organic connections to the West, its policing role, its bullying role, it's keeping both the Palestinians in check, but also big regional players like Iran, Turkey, even Egypt. And basically, the West was quite confident that everything they had sent the IMF to Tunisia a couple of weeks before the Tunisian revolution happened. And just because some guy got in a fight in some rural part of Tunisia about an unofficial fruit stand that he was selling in, he commits suicide, and then the entire Arab world burns down. Like for the and that was a vindication of the basic Israel and Western academics have said that the situation is unsustainable, uh, economically, politically. Basically the situation of Arab autocracy that in some cases is supported by the West, in some cases is not about the West, but the point is you have that out there, and but you have no reliable allies is the key point. And if anything, you have Israel becoming more important to Israel because of the main things I said about how Israel combines the question of hydrocarbons with the question of uh, all the sort of research and development and chip war that is taking place. and basically is their watchdog in the region. I think that analysis is still very valid, and for that explains why you have such a ridiculous, out of the blue, all of a sudden Israel's aid package goes up six times. It also explains why Germany is providing Israel nuclear submarines, and why they made a trade deal with Israel immediately after the Ukraine Russia thing. There's a lot of signs on the wall that basically the West is sort of linked, but this is the funny part about it. It's not, there's nothing funny about it, but the truth is it became a joke because basically Israel in front of the world is very openly fascistic. It hasn't had a problem. Said we're going to starve the people in Gaza. Big deal. What's the problem here? And the problem here is that you have Western governments who are like, that doesn't make me feel so comfortable. But at the end, we need you more than we need the Palestinians. So we're going to make sure that people like in Germany can't speak about Zionism or other certain things. So, but what I'm really trying to say here is that what the irony is that Israel now and the Western alliance with Israel is not even with Israel anymore. It's like traditionally it would be with the state of Israel, and the West had its preferences for making its alliance with the Labor Party or with the Israeli army. Since the genocide began, it's actually been alliance with the Likud, and now it's not even alliance with the Likud. It's with a section of the Likud where the most extreme, psychotic, messianic, fascistic, neo-Nazi version of Zionist politics that are out there. If you scratch the surface of the people behind Netanyahu, you find eugenicists, very open eugenicists talking about. You have Jewish supremacists completely. You have Kahanism, you should know the ideological distinction of it. It's not that they're fascist and are willing to kill anyone who's non-Jewish. It also means Kahanists actually believe in the killing of secular Jews because if secular Jews are actually successful, then in what they're trying to do, they'll destroy Judaism from their perspective. And that's why actually the Israeli state, once upon a time, used to ban Kahanism. Well, now it's in the government, and actually the new ambassador to the United States, it was an ex-Kahanist. So these politics have moved pretty front and center inside the Israeli coalition, and it's gone to the extreme situation where countries like Germany and America are, indefinitely defend and support Israel, are supporting these politics directly now, not just indirectly. And we can't act stupid. We have to recognize where we are. And the absurdity of the situation came out most recently in Amsterdam, where the most fascistic, the football hooligans claiming genocide, destroying property in a third-party city with nothing to do with it, destroying people's personal right to hang a flag outside, start harassing anyone who, is deemed to be pro-Palestinian. And it blows up the situation. You have the leaders of the Western world, particularly the liberal ones as well, calling it a pogrom, transforming a bunch of football hooligans into an Anne Frank scenario. It's some kind of bad joke, very transparent, instrumentalization, weaponization of anti-Semitism, demeaning the principles basically of anti-Semitism itself, and turning the whole situation up on its head. Everybody knows football hooligans can often be a bunch of racist schmucks and do it, let alone the video of it showing what they did in terms of destruction of property, and what they were saying was evident for all to see. And even the Amsterdam police had to basically acknowledge that. But that hasn't changed the position of any of these governments about what happened there. It goes to show about the poor intellectual foundations and political foundations of the entire Western project around their alliance with this genocidal state today. So Germans need to be aware of where they stand in history. This is where we are. Wake up from the situation, organize, build large, broad coalitions that can incorporate the broad humanist principle of ending the facilitation of genocide and apartheid in your community. The blood will be on your hands if you do not take a stand, that's clear stand against that in this moment of history. And that is what we are called to do today. I hope my talk can contribute to that taking place in Germany. Good luck. We have a fight ahead of us, but we have also a world to win. And we can take inspiration from the bravery and steadfastness that we see in Gaza, and hopefully do what we can to end any more suffering for Palestinians, Arabs, people of the region, etc., and bring peace and justice to the region. Thank you.
Yeah.
I can't see anybody there, so I have no idea who's in the audience. I see a bunch of empty chairs. So
Many thanks. It's said it's Sunday morning. Hopefully the chairs will fill up as the day gets along. To anyone who are inspired by what Toufic says and want to get involved, there are all sorts of stalls downstairs of active campaigns where you can get involved and not stay isolated on the issue. Thanks again, Toufic. Great that you
thank you.
could take part and hope to see you soon.
Bless. Good luck, comrades. You have a tough fight, but we can do it. Yalla. See you later, folks. Salut.